this program, we really wanted you can have multiple different types of renewable energy that is evaluated through these renewable energy assessments. And so agrivoltaic type of system, right? If we have on-farm use, the webinar that we did previously was about preserved farms, and going forward, their last one, that's going to be in 2 weeks on St. Patrick's Day, is going to be about then the funding of those systems. And so that ties in right to the REAP funding that's available, federal funding that you can apply for to help offset the cost of your system. And it's through these assessments, you get the assessment done. That's one of the pieces that you'll need, along with then vendor quotes and some other information that then you can use to make that federal application for funding. So let me turn today's presenter, Justin Bryan, Program Manager with EnSave, and let me just turn the program right over to him, and we'll have some time for questions at the close.
All right, thank you, Laura. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'll just get straight into it. So agrivoltaics, first slide here, just kind of a brief definition of what that is. The term agrivoltaics is a fairly new phrase, so it may not be something that everyone has heard of, but most everybody has heard of a dual use system, and that's exactly what agrivoltaics is. It's a dual use system, and for our purposes specifically, it's where agricultural production can take place on the same land as your photovoltaic or PV system. And again, serving two purposes: to generate renewable energy while allowing for agricultural and or ecosystem production. So some examples of that would be crop production, animal husbandry, livestock grazing, in other words, and ecosystem services. So natural vegetation, pollinator species, things like that would fall under that category. Next slide, Laura, please. Yes, so this comes from, and you can see the citation down there. The website is also in, the URL link is also in the resources, but this comes straight from the NREL website and what they have depicted and what is possible under these agrivoltaic systems. So of course, crop production, and you can see below there some different variations of what a PV system would look like to be able to, continue farming, vegetable crops, things like that underneath the panels. And you'll notice there are several different ways to construct those arrays to allow farm production, agricultural production to continue. Also livestock grazing. This is a pretty popular way of using agrivoltaics currently, with livestock underneath, specifically, sheep and cattle that seem to thrive under these systems. And then also ecosystem services. So ecosystem services is a little bit of a broad term, but specifically what we've been seeing under these PV systems would be natural vegetation. So your native grass or prairie meadow, species growing underneath, but also pollinator habitat. So planting, pollinator species underneath, things like that. And we've also looked at, and actually I'm working with a gentleman now with a greenhouse where we're using the south-facing slopes of his greenhouse to put PV panels on, and there's several benefits to that as well. So, all right, Laura, next slide. All right, good deal. So benefits of the agrivoltaic. So again, the main thing is, as a farmer, you don't, taking your land out of production is never a good thing. It brings your production down. The land is what makes your money, makes you your money. So you need to keep that land in production if you can. So by implementing a dual use system, you can keep your agricultural land in production. There are even some early white papers, if you will, that show that there are depending on the crop and everything, that that these systems may even increase yields and reduce water usage if you're irrigating. It keeps ecosystems operating, again, with the natural vegetation, pollinator species underneath panels. So it's not, in other words, it's not, you don't have to just have a bare ground, dirt floor underneath these systems. There are, specific species that thrive well in the shade and those kind of things. Again, another great benefit, of course, with the PV system is that it is going to generate electricity to be able to offset your farm or small business usage. We tend to try to design these systems in line with New Jersey standards, or I say we try to, we do, in line with New Jersey standards, and especially with the preserved farm standards that are put forth. And generate and offset up to 110% of your farm, historical farm usage. There's also the benefit of increased land use efficiency. So again, dual use, meaning your land is now serving two purposes. So we don't have to, bring in any new land for energy generation, and you don't have to lose any of your agricultural production land to be able to generate electricity. The dual use is, increasing that land use efficiency. Also, added benefit, these dual use systems, agrivoltaics, may reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So again, the theory behind that is, by producing food and energy on the same land, the overall carbon footprint can be reduced. Now, on a small scale, this may be, very minimal, if at all, but on a large scale, when we're looking at, very large agrivoltaic systems, it can be pretty significant, decrease of that carbon footprint. So next slide, please, Laura. All right, yeah, so agrivoltaics on your farm, what that could look like. If you're growing vegetables, we do, that is a possibility. PV over your vegetables, or vegetables under your PV, ever how you want to look at that. If you've got livestock grazing under PV. Again, pollinator habitat under PV. This is, there's also NRCS, you may be able to get a contract with NRCS to plant pollinator species under your panels. They do offer incentives for that kind of practice, putting the native pollinator species, and then you can put your panels over that. Again, if you have a greenhouse, we can do greenhouse PV. As far as a greenhouse, it needs to be structurally sound. PV tends to weigh quite a bit. Not just that, but up around New Jersey with snowfall and things like that in the winter with the added weight. Just want to consider the structure of that greenhouse as well. And there's other ways to put PV over greenhouse. It can be pole mounted. The same way as we're talking about pole mounting with livestock or vegetables, and it can just, kind of sit above your greenhouse. It doesn't necessarily have to be mounted on your greenhouse. Cut flowers under PV, again, a lot of cut flowers benefit from the additional shade, and of course, with the shading comes and the added benefit of greater soil moisture retention. So a lot of cut flowers would benefit from that, and then also horticultural production. So there's a lot of plants in horticulture that do not prefer full sun. They prefer at least partial shade, and so these agrivoltaics systems can provide essentially what would amount to a shade cloth over some horticultural production, and give that partial shade for optimal growth of those horticultural plants. So, all right, next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so some things to consider. The next couple of slides will be, things to consider. This slide, again, is directly from the NREL website. The link, the URL will be on the resources page. I highly encourage everybody to go read through this document. It is extremely informative and has a lot more information than I can dive into in just a short presentation. But pulling these things from there, it's as a farmer, these are the things, you would definitely want to be considering. So the climate, you want to make sure that, the conditions are appropriate for not only the photovoltaic system, but, your agricultural system. So, if you're growing, and this is going to be a little absurd, but if you're growing, 40 acres of corn, the corn isn't going to necessarily like the shade provided by your agrivoltaic system. Not to mention the other issues that there would be with putting a PV system over a 40-acre corn patch. But just consider that climate and what your crop needs are. Also, the configurations back on slide 4. There were several different configurations shown, and those are by no means exclusive or all inclusive, I should say, of configurations. So the PV technology, the layout, design, as the farmer, you need to consider those things very, very carefully, because you don't want a 3-foot agrivoltaic system when you've got to get an 8-foot tractor underneath to be able to prepare the ground or plant your vegetables and things like that. So the height, the spacing between the panels, those kind of things, definitely need to be considering those. And moving on, the crop selection. Again, not all crops will thrive under PV systems. A lot of full sun crops like your corn and down here where I'm at, cotton, some full sun crops will not thrive very well under the partial shading provided by or full shading, depending on the configuration provided by these PV systems. So it needs to definitely be considered in what the crop selection under that agrivoltaic system will be, and ensure that the crop under that will thrive. The compatibility with your farm. A corn farm is probably not going to do very well with a agrivoltaic system over their crop. Again, for the reasons mentioned before. But if you've got if you're growing vegetables and you can put this an agrivoltaic system up and line it up with your current rows, and the poles and the racking and the structure and everything can line up fairly well, and you'll get the benefits of the partial shading and everything from the system while it generates electricity for you, and it will not hinder in any way your vegetable production. Of course, you'll have to watch out and be more careful turning around and with your implements and your tractor. You don't want to hit the poles and things like that. So it would really just be an added let's call it minor inconvenience of the poles, but it wouldn't hinder your agricultural production in that way. Same way with cut flowers or anything like that could come into tight rows underneath, or even livestock grazing. It's not gonna prohibit the grass from growing their forage, whatever your forage selection for them would be. And then also collaboration. Any project, any successful project, it's gonna be successful if there's some good communication between all your interested parties. And so good communication with your utility company, your neighbors, your local townships, county, state, officials, things like that. It's always good to kind of do your homework and communicate with those that will be affected or involved in the process. So next slide, please, Laura. All right, yes, a few more things to consider. So again, being in New Jersey, there's the preserved farm agricultural management practices to consider. We went over that in last week's presentation, the setbacks, screening, sizing requirements, things like that. That is definitely something you're going to want to talk to Chuck with the SADC is a great resource to have. That would be a good person to contact and discuss, if you're a preserved farm, what those requirements would be, for instance, for a 10-foot system, or if you're going to, if you've got a very large tractor and you need to get under a 12-foot system. There's different sizing setback screening requirements for a 0 to 10-foot system than there are for 10 to 20-foot systems. And so those are the kind of things to consider if you're a preserved farm. Again, I know it's kind of redundant, but I can't stress enough, the compatibility of agrivoltaics with your farm, livestock grazing and vegetable production, cut flower production, horticulture. Those are some things that are extremely compatible with agrivoltaic systems, simply because they will be able to thrive under the partial or full shade provided by the systems. There are certain crops and certain agricultural production systems that would not be very compatible with agrivoltaics. Not saying it's impossible, but it would be, a different design and a lot more consideration that would need to be put into that system. The economic viability, as Laura mentioned previously, we'll be discussing funding and different things, the economic viability in more detail next week. But there is an increased cost for agrivoltaics. The racking is slightly different, and then the pole mounting and all of that. There is an added cost to raise the system up off the ground, any kind of considerable height. And so there is a good little increase in cost for that, but there are financial incentives available. Renewable energy for America program is offering 40% for approved applicants for their systems right now. That's just one financial incentives, and as Laura was saying, this RETA program with these technical reports, it plays right into that. And so that, like I say, not going into a ton of detail today because we will be talking about it next week, but just consider the economic viability of that system, and then see again what financial incentives there are out there for you and your farm, and to be able to offset some of the cost of that system. Again, ground mounted versus pole mounted, this kind of comes into play with the compatibility of your farm. If you're grazing sheep underneath, for instance, really you only need to have it as high as needed for those sheep to get underneath. You could have the bottom of the panel, it's an 8-foot panel if you have it, in portrait orientation, we'll say. So if you had it 3 foot off the ground, that's an additional, somewhere in the range of 9 to 11 feet, depending on angle and everything, up underneath that panel. So that would be more than enough space for the sheep to get up underneath, and the grass, their forage would still be able to grow all of that. Now if you were grazing livestock underneath, you might want to raise it up to 5 feet so that they're not bumping up against the panels, or 6 feet, so that they're not bumping up against the panels, that they'll rub on the poles and scratch themselves on the poles and those kind of things, just like they would any other tree or structure that you would have on your farm. But you definitely don't want them, messing with those panels. So you might want to raise that up, a little bit. Again, there is an added cost for the pole mounted. You want to consider what equipment and implements are going to be used under that agrivoltaic system. And then, of course, daily activities. If you're going to be working underneath those panels every single day, if you put them flat to the, flush to the ground, and you're bumping your head every day, depending on what you're doing, that might not be ideal for you. You might want to raise them up just a little bit, depending on what you would be doing every day. And then again, I mentioned it already, but again, just, communicate with your neighbors, your state and local officials, anybody that, would, for lack of a better term, be impacted or have a say in that process. Just make sure you're, communicating with them very well. Next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so just to kind of sum it up, a dual use system or agrivoltaic system offers the sustainability of food and energy production systems. So again, it's dual use. You get electricity generation from the PV system, and you can keep your agricultural land in production. That's essentially the bottom line there. So For any questions, my contact about this presentation, my contact information is provided right there below. And I can copy that, or Laura, if you want to copy that, and I, we can put that in the chat for future reference. Yeah, that's it. And